Her billionaire husband and his mistress pushed his pregnant trillionaire wife off the yacht, but her comeback was unimaginable. Victoria stood at the yacht's edge, one hand gently holding her 6-month pregnant stomach, the other gripping the wine glass her husband had just handed her with what looked like a caring smile, totally unaware that behind her, her husband and his lover were taking their last steps toward her. The wooden floor made sounds, two people's feet moving together at the same time, and before Victoria could turn around, before she could even understand what was happening, rough hands crashed into her back with terrible strength. Everything seemed to slow down as her pregnant body flew over the edge, spinning in the air, catching one last look at the two people who just pushed her. Her husband's face emotionless and blank, and next to him his mistress, watching Victoria fall with eyes full of desire for money rather than shame. The world turned as she dropped toward the dark ocean waters below, the lies crushing her heart, the fear taking over everything. The man she married had just tried to kill not only her, but her baby who wasn't born yet. Her scream cut through the night as one terrible question burned in her brain. How does a pregnant trillionaire wife come back from this? How does a woman who's been thrown from a boat, left to die by her own husband, possibly stay alive, let alone get revenge? But as the ocean got closer and closer, one thought cut through all the mess like a sharp knife. They think I'm going to die tonight. They think they've beaten me. They don't know what's coming for them, because trillionaires don't build money empires by being soft, and the comeback Victoria was about to deliver, it wouldn't just be unimaginable, it would be completely unstoppable. In this story, you will learn how to spot lies before it's too late, protect yourself with laws and money in relationships, and fight back smartly rather than with feelings when trust gets broken. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. The afternoon light came through the windows as Victoria Lancaster stepped out of her car, one hand pressed against her lower back where the pregnancy pain had been growing all morning. Dr. Martinez had been quick today, checking the baby's heartbeat and size in fast time, which meant Victoria could finally get home and rest instead of working another 4 hours at the office. She closed the front door quietly, years of habit making her steps soft in the huge house. The shiny floors glowed in the natural light, every surface clean and perfect, though Victoria barely looked as she took off her shoes and walked toward the stairs. Her mind was already dreaming about the bathtub waiting upstairs, but her husband's voice made her freeze. It floated from the office room, and something in his tone made Victoria's hands stop on the stairway rail, made her feet move toward that partly open door instead of going up toward rest. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We're going to push her off the yacht, make it look like an accident." Marcus's voice had no feeling, just flat business talk. "After crying for a while, I'll take over the company. Everything will be mine." A woman's voice said something Victoria couldn't quite hear, the words quiet through the phone speaker. "The timing is perfect," Marcus went on. 6 months pregnant, a lone location, sad accident. She loses her balance, goes into the water, clean and easy. Victoria's hand moved to her mouth, pushing hard against her lips to trap the sound trying to escape. Her back hit the hallway wall as her legs stopped working, sliding down until she sat on the cold, shiny floor, her pregnant belly going up and down with short breaths that couldn't seem to bring enough air. Her husband was planning to murder her. The words played again in her mind, crazy and impossible, yet she'd heard them in his voice, that voice that whispered love to her in the mornings, that read pregnancy books out loud in bed, that promised forever on their wedding day 3 years ago. The talk in the office ended with Marcus's casual, "I'll call you later," and Victoria heard his chair scrape against the floor. Fear shot through her body. He couldn't find her here, couldn't know she'd heard. Her pregnant body moved with surprising speed, pushing herself up and running toward the front door, pulling it open and then closing it again, this time loudly. "Marcus, honey, I'm home." Her voice sounded surprisingly normal, steady despite the terror running through her blood. He came out from the office seconds later, his face changing into that warm smile she'd always believed in, that smile that now looked like a mask hiding something evil underneath. "Baby, you're back early. How was the doctor visit?" Dr. Martinez said everything looks perfect. Victoria moved toward him, letting him pull her into a hug, letting him kiss her forehead with fake care. "The baby's heartbeat is strong. That's wonderful." His hand moved to her belly, and Victoria had to stop herself from pulling away in disgust. This hand was planning to push her to death, these arms holding her, counting down the days until she'd be gone. "You look tired. Why don't you go rest?" "I think I will." She pulled away gently, managing another smile. "Just need to grab some files from the office first." "I'll get them for you." "No, it's fine. You relax. I know exactly where they are." She walked into the office before he could say no, her eyes looking around the room that suddenly felt dangerous despite its familiar leather chairs and wooden desk. The computer sat on the desk, screen black, though Victoria wasn't interested in the computer, her attention fixed on the small control panel hidden behind the bookshelf, the one her father had shown her years ago when he'd first given her this house as an engagement gift. "There are sound recording devices throughout this house," he told her then, his face serious. "I put them in when business spies were a real threat. The control panel is here, behind the Shakespeare books. I'm probably too worried, but better too worried than not ready." Victoria waited until she heard Marcus moving around in the kitchen, the sound of the refrigerator opening, before she pushed aside the leather-covered books and opened the panel. The system was easy to use. Her father always liked things that work over complicated things. She connected her phone, picked the office recordings from the past hour, and watched the progress line move across the screen as the files copied. While the sound copied, her mind traveled backward, trying to find when the lies had started. 4 years ago, she'd come back from finishing her business school overseas, excited to finally work in her father's company. He'd told her to dress as a cleaning lady on her first day, a test to see how workers treated people they thought didn't matter. The embarrassment was instant, big employees brushing past her, some openly making fun of the new cleaning lady, one group purposely spilling coffee on the floor she just cleaned. Instinctively to her belly to check for injury, the baby kicked, strong, insistent, in relief flooded through Victoria so powerfully she nearly sobbed. Then strong hands gripped her arms, professional and efficient. A voice spoke directly into her ear, calm despite the urgency. "Mrs. Lancaster, we've got you. Stay calm. You're safe now." The Navy officer's wetsuit was black against the dark water, his face hidden by diving gear, though his skill was clear in every movement as he secured her and began swimming toward the boat waiting in the shadows. Another diver surfaced on her other side, and together they moved her through the water with practiced coordination. Above them, the yacht's engine roared to life. Marcus and Rachel were leaving her, abandoning her to drown, already planning their sad performances for the media coverage that would follow, already counting the trillions they thought they'd inherit. Victoria let herself be pulled onto the Navy boat, let the ambulance workers swarm her with their equipment and their questions, their hands gentle as they checked her vitals and her baby's heartbeat. Someone wrapped heated blankets around her shoulders. Someone else pressed an oxygen mask to her face. But Victoria's attention fixed on the betrayal, her mind already moving forward to the next phase. 1 month. She needed to stay dead for 1 month while the private investigator gathered proof, while her father's grief became real enough to make Marcus's eventual arrest even more devastating, while Marcus and Rachel grew comfortable in their victory and sloppy in their confidence. "The baby?" Victoria managed to ask through the oxygen mask, her voice rough from salt water. The ambulance worker smiled, his face genuinely warm. "Strong heartbeat. She's a fighter, just like her mother." Victoria closed her eyes, letting the relief wash over her, even as fury burned underneath. Marcus and Rachel thought they'd murdered her tonight. They thought they'd won. They had no idea that their victim had just become their destroyer, and the countdown to their arrest had already begun. The news broke within hours, headlines screaming across every major outlet. Trillionaire heiress Victoria Lancaster falls from yacht during anniversary celebration. Body not yet recovered. The media circus that followed was exactly what Marcus had expected. Cameras positioned outside the Lancaster estate, reporters shouting questions at anyone who entered or exited, the public's morbid fascination with tragedy and wealth, creating the perfect storm of coverage. Marcus played his role flawlessly. The footage that went viral showed him coming out from the police station after his initial statement, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He'd worn the watch Victoria had given him last Christmas, a calculated detail that made social media cry for the devastated widower who couldn't bear to remove his wife's final gift.
Victoria had knelt there, tears burning behind her eyes, feeling totally alone in the company that would someday be hers. Then Marcus had appeared. Marcus Romano, a young business analyst whose employee card showed he worked in company buyouts. He'd yelled at the men who spilled the coffee, demanded they say sorry, helped Victoria to her feet with such real kindness that she'd felt something move in her chest. Thankfulness, attraction, the beginning of trust. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that he'd recognized her. Rachel had shown him Victoria's photo beforehand, had told him exactly when the boss's daughter would be testing workers, and promised him promotions if he played the hero. Rachel, her best friend since college, the woman who'd set up their whole relationship. Victoria had fallen in love slowly, carefully, her natural caution worn down by Marcus's constant attention and seeming love. 1 year after that first meeting, he'd asked her to marry him. Her father had approved, seeing in Marcus a hard-working man who'd earned his place through effort rather than connections. The wedding had been beautiful. The marriage had seemed perfect. 7 months later, her father retired, handing her the company with proud tears. She'd immediately promoted Marcus to manager, supporting him to the board, wanting to share her success with her husband. He'd seemed grateful, loving, supportive. All lies. Every moment, every touch, every whispered promise, fake performances in a plan designed to steal her fortune. The transfer finished. Victoria unplugged her phone, put back the books, and stood there for a moment, her hand resting on her 6th-month belly. They weren't just planning to kill her, they were planning to kill her daughter, the tiny baby she'd seen on the screen hours ago, the tiny heartbeat that had made her cry with happiness. Anger turned into something cold and planned. Her father had taught her that feeling was okay in private, but action needed planning. She had inherited his trillions, but more importantly, she had inherited his smart thinking. The next morning, Victoria waited until Marcus left for the office before making her calls. First, her lawyer, David Chen, who'd handled her father's business for 40 years. "I need to see you today. It's an emergency." Then the police station. She was connected to Detective Lisa Thompson, explained in careful, controlled sentences that her husband was planning her murder. "I have sound proof. Can you meet me at my lawyer's office in 2 hours?" The meeting was exactly what Victoria needed: professional, smart, cold. They listened to the recording 4 times. David took notes in his exact handwriting. Detective Thompson contacted a private investigator named Robert Miller, who arrived within 30 minutes and began explaining watching plans. "We need him to try it," Detective Thompson explained, her face serious. "The recording gives us planning, but if we want charges that will actually stick, we need attempted murder, which means I have to let him try to push me off the yacht," Victoria finished, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "I understand." They spent 4 hours planning, Navy officers positioned nearby, ambulance workers on standby, a life jacket Victoria would wear hidden beneath her clothing, exact timing for the rescue. The private investigator would follow Marcus and his mistress, whoever she was, writing down their movements, their talks, building a case that would be totally airtight. 6 days later, Victoria sat across from Marcus at dinner, forcing herself to eat despite the sick feeling that had nothing to do with pregnancy. He reached across the table, taking her hand with that smile she'd once loved. "I've been thinking about our anniversary,"
he said, his thumb making circles on her palm. 3 years. It deserves something special. What did you have in mind? A yacht trip, just us, and maybe Rachel. I know she's your best friend, and I thought it might be nice to include her in the celebration. Sunset on the ocean, champagne, making memories. His eyes held hers, warm and loving, and completely false. What do you think? Victoria smiled back, matching his fake show with one of her own. That sounds perfect, Marcus. Absolutely perfect. Victoria stood at the yacht's edge, one hand protectively holding her 6-month pregnant belly, the other holding the sparkling cider Marcus had poured for her with such fake care. The life jacket pressed against her ribs beneath the flowing silk of her evening dress, uncomfortable but invisible, exactly as Detective Thompson had promised when they'd done the final fitting 3 days ago. "You look beautiful tonight," Marcus said, walking up from behind with Rachel at his side, and Victoria had to stop the shiver that wanted to crawl up her back. She knew that voice now, knew it was the same voice that had discussed her murder with casual lack of care, the same voice that had calculated her death like a business deal. She turned, forcing her face to stay soft and trusting, the fake show she'd been keeping up for 6 days since that dinner when he'd suggested this romantic anniversary celebration. "Thank you, honey. This is perfect. The 3 of us together celebrating 3 years of marriage." Rachel moved closer, her arm linking through Victoria's with the familiar ease of a best friend, though Victoria could barely stand the touch now that she knew the truth. "I'm so glad you included me," Rachel said, her voice carrying that warm care Victoria had never questioned until 6 days ago. 3 years. It feels like just yesterday you were trying on wedding dresses and asking my opinion. Because you were already sleeping with my fiancé, Victoria thought, though her face showed only thankfulness. "I wouldn't want to celebrate without you. You've been there for everything important in my life." The words tasted like poison, but Victoria said them with perfect honesty, watching Rachel's eyes for any hint of guilt and finding none. Only satisfaction. Waiting. The look of someone watching a long-planned trick finally reach the end.
His voice cracked at all the right moments during the press conference, his hands shaking as he gripped the podium. "Victoria was everything to me," he told the cameras, his performance so convincing that even Detective Thompson, watching from her office while building the case against him, felt a flicker of admiration for his acting ability. "She was excited about our baby, about our future together. I keep thinking I'll wake up and this will be a nightmare, but it's not. She's gone." Rachel stood slightly behind him during that press conference, her own grief carefully calculated to match his, the best friend destroyed by loss. Her face puffy from crying, her hand occasionally reaching out to squeeze Marcus's shoulder in support. She'd given her own statement earlier, voice breaking as she described watching her best friend fall, described the terror of searching the dark waters, described holding Marcus as they waited for rescue boats that arrived too late. "Victoria was like a sister to me," Rachel told reporters outside her apartment building, surrounded by flowers and candles left by strangers who'd never met Victoria but mourned her anyway. "I keep expecting her to call, to text, to show up at my door laughing about some business deal. I don't know how to exist in a world without her in it." The investigation proceeded exactly as Marcus had planned. The Coast Guard searched for 4 days before officially declaring the search stopped due to strong currents that likely carried the body far from the initial fall location. Ocean biology experts appeared on news programs explaining how ocean currents worked, how a body might never be recovered, how tragic but not uncommon this outcome was. The official report cited accidental death. Pregnant woman, tired from the day, lost her balance at the edge. Witnesses confirmed she'd seemed unsteady during dinner. Victoria's father aged a decade in those 4 weeks.
William Lancaster had built an empire through ruthless intelligence and calculated risk, but watching news footage of the yacht, seeing the edge his daughter had fallen from, listening to Marcus's grief-stricken statements, it broke something in him that decades of business warfare never had. He stopped going to the office. He stopped eating regularly. He sat in Victoria's childhood bedroom surrounded by her high school trophies and college acceptance letters and wept in a way he hadn't since his wife died 20 years ago. Marcus visited him daily, playing the devoted son-in-law with the same precision he'd played devoted husband. He brought food William wouldn't eat, sat beside him in that bedroom, held his hand while they both stared at photographs of Victoria, and slowly, carefully, he began planting seeds. She would want the company to continue thriving, Marcus said one evening, his voice soft and hesitant, like a man afraid to even mention business during grief. She loved Lancaster Industries more than anything except the baby. I know it's too soon to think about this, but eventually someone needs to. William's voice came out hollow, empty. You should take over temporary until... He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate whether he meant until his grandchild was born, or until he could face running the company himself, or until some impossible future where his daughter wasn't dead. Are you sure? Marcus's hesitation was perfectly calculated, the reluctant heir who needed to be convinced. I don't want to overstep. This is your legacy, your... It was Victoria's legacy. William turned to him, his eyes red and exhausted. She chose you. She trusted you. That's enough for me. Rachel played her supporting role brilliantly, practically moving into the Lancaster estate to help William through his grief, while actually ensuring Marcus had constant updates on the old man's mental state. She cooked meals he didn't eat, organized flowers from well-wishers, screened phone calls from business associates trying to discuss business matters. She positioned herself as the loyal family friend, the bridge between William's grief and the practical necessities of continuing to live. You're like the daughter I have left, William told her one night, the words slurred from the whiskey he'd been drinking more frequently. Victoria loved you so much, trusted you completely. Rachel hugged him, her face buried in his shoulder so he couldn't see her expression. I loved her too. I'll always be here for you, William, for you and for Marcus. We're family now. 5 weeks after Victoria's death, the board of directors gathered for an emergency meeting. Several members had been calling for leadership clarity. The company couldn't function indefinitely without a CEO, and William Lancaster made it clear he couldn't return to that role. Marcus entered the boardroom in an impeccably tailored black suit, his expression carrying the weight of reluctant duty, a man stepping up because circumstances demanded it, despite his personal devastation. Gentlemen, ladies, Marcus began, his voice carrying that perfect tremor of grief being pushed aside for responsibility. Victoria would have wanted... The boardroom doors opened with enough
as completely as he'd planned to erase her. Rachel Hayes, the judge continued, you have been found guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and embezzlement as an accessory. This court sentences you to 60 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Rachel didn't cry, didn't plead. She simply nodded once, accepting her fate with the same cold calculation she'd applied to orchestrating Victoria's murder, and allowed herself to be led away in handcuffs that would define the rest of her life. Victoria stood as the courtroom cleared, her father's hand finding hers in squeezing gently. Outside, the media circus waited, cameras and reporters and the endless appetite for a story this dramatic. But Victoria was ready. She'd survived attempted murder, faked her death, orchestrated the perfect takedown, and recovered her stolen fortune.
She'd earned her victory through intelligence, preparation, and the cold application of justice. And as she walked out of that courtroom with her father beside her and her daughter moving strongly in her belly, Victoria Lancaster understood with absolute clarity that trust could be broken, love could be weaponized, but strength, real strength, could never be stolen. Dear viewers, when betrayal wears the face of love, survival demands more than tears. It requires strategy. Victoria's journey teaches you to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, to protect your assets independently in any relationship, to document everything when suspicion arises, and to respond with calculated intelligence rather than emotional reaction. Her story proves that your greatest comeback begins the moment you stop being a victim and start being a strategist. Drop in the comments what lessons you've learned and what you would have done differently in Victoria's position. Subscribe for more stories that educate, entertain, and empower your journey. This is Victoria. You're confused. You hit your head. There was an accident. Play the recording, Victoria instructed David, cutting through Marcus's lies with the efficiency of a woman who'd spent 3 years watching him manipulate people and had finally learned to recognize every tactic in his arsenal. The audio filled the boardroom with crystal clarity, Marcus's voice unmistakable as it discussed murder logistics. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We're gonna push her off the yacht, make it look like an accident. After crying for a while, I'll take over the company. Everything will be mine." The silence that followed was absolute. Board members stared at Marcus with expressions ranging from horror to disgust. The man they'd considered promoting revealed as someone who'd calculated murder with the same casual efficiency he'd once applied to quarterly projections. William's face had transformed from grief to fury so profound that Victoria worried about his blood pressure, though the chairman of Lancaster Industries deserved to see justice delivered in full. "Before we proceed with the arrests," Victoria said, her voice steady as she pulled an envelope from David's briefcase, "there's one more matter to address." She crossed the boardroom to where Marcus stood frozen, his face still corpse-white from shock, and placed the envelope in his trembling hands. "Divorce papers. Sign them now." Marcus's fingers fumbled with the envelope, pulling out the documents that would legally sever their 3-year marriage, though his hands shook so badly he could barely hold the pen David offered. "Victoria, please, we can talk about this. I can explain." "Sign them." Victoria's voice carried no room for negotiation, no hint of the woman who'd once loved this man, only cold command that made Marcus's lawyer instincts recognize a battle already lost. He signed 4 pages, each signature more desperate than the last, his hand moving mechanically while his brain still trying to calculate escape routes that didn't exist. When he finished, David retrieved the documents, checking each signature with professional thoroughness before nodding to Victoria. "It's done," David confirmed. "Good." Victoria turned to Detective Thompson. "Now you can arrest him." The handcuffs clicked into place with a metallic finality. "Marcus Romano, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Across the room, 2 other officers moved toward Rachel, who'd been standing frozen since Victoria's entrance, her face cycling through emotions too rapidly to track. She didn't struggle as they cuffed her, didn't protest her innocence, simply stared at Victoria with something that might have been regret or might have been fury at being caught. "Rachel Hayes, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and embezzlement as an accessory." "Why?" Victoria asked softly, the question escaping before she could stop it. 4 years of friendship demanding at least that much closure. "We were friends, Rachel. Real friends. Why would you—" "Because you had everything," Rachel replied, her voice flat and emotionless. The mask finally dropped. "The fortune, the company, the perfect life handed to you just because you were born into the right family. I had to work for everything. So when I met Marcus and realized we could take it, why wouldn't I?"
The honesty was almost refreshing in its cruelty. Victoria watched as officers led both of them toward the door, these two people who'd orchestrated years of deception with such perfect precision that she'd never suspected until overhearing that phone call. As the doors closed behind Marcus and Rachel, William crossed the boardroom, his arms opening to embrace his daughter who'd survived the impossible. "My girl," he whispered, his voice breaking as he held her carefully, mindful of her pregnant belly. "My brilliant, fierce girl. I thought I'd lost you forever." "I know, Dad. I'm sorry." Victoria returned the embrace, allowing herself this moment of emotion after 5 weeks of strategic planning and performed death. "I'm so sorry I had to put you through that, but it was the only way to make sure they couldn't hurt us again." "You're here now. You're safe. That's all that matters." William pulled back, his hands framing her face as tears streamed down his weathered cheeks, tears of joy now, not grief. "And you saved Lancaster Industries, saved everything we built." David stepped forward with his briefcase, addressing the board members who'd erupted into chaos. "The private investigation reveals that Romano and Hayes embezzled $90 million from Lancaster Industries over the past 3 years. The funds had been traced through offshore accounts and shell corporations." 90 million. The number rippled through the boardroom, board members exchanging glances that mixed relief with horror at how thoroughly they'd been deceived, how much had been stolen while Marcus played devoted husband and rising executive. "Additionally," David continued, "all evidence has been submitted to the district attorney's office. Given the severity of the crimes and the overwhelming documentation, we expect this case to proceed quickly." 1 week later, Victoria sat in the courtroom gallery, her hand resting on her 7th-month belly as the judge read the verdict. The trial was swift, the evidence too overwhelming to dispute, the audio recordings too damning to explain away, the financial trail too clear to obscure. Marcus's expensive lawyers tried every tactic, but you couldn't defend the indefensible, couldn't spin attempted murder and embezzlement into misunderstanding or accident. "Marcus Romano," the judge intoned, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have been found guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and embezzlement of $90 million. This court sentences you to 60 years in federal prison without possibility of parole." Marcus's face crumpled, the performance finally abandoned as reality crashed through his calculations. 60 years.